Prince Kale stood alone on the crystal balcony of the Starpoint Academy, his clawed hands gripping the railing as he watched his younger brother streak across the evening sky. Rivers of crimson fire poured from their mouths, twisting and spiraling in elaborate patterns that made the other students gasp and cheer from the courtyards below. Each burst of flame was a declaration of power, a reminder of what it meant to be dragon royalty. At 27 years old, Kale should have been commanding entire fleets across the Empire's outer territories. He should have been standing beside his father during diplomatic ceremonies, demonstrating the raw power that had kept their family on the throne for 6,000 years. Instead, he was here, shipped off to this distant academy world under the polite fiction of being a special diplomatic observer. Everyone knew what that really meant. He was being hidden away because he was broken. The physicians had examined him since he was a hatchling. Every scale, every bone, every internal organ had been scanned, tested, and analyzed more times than he could count. The results were always the same. Perfect anatomy. Perfect bloodline. The genetic markers for fire production were all present and functioning. There was absolutely no physical reason why he couldn't breathe fire. Yet when he tried, nothing happened. Not even smoke. Just the hollow feeling of failure burning in his chest where flame should have been. His youngest brother Dane swooped past the balcony, showing off with a spiral of white-hot fire that left glowing trails in the air. Some of the younger dragons watching from below actually bowed. Dane was only 19, but he'd already earned 3 battle commendations. The Empire loved him. Kale turned away from the display and walked back into the empty observation hall. The Academy's stone corridors felt like a prison, even though they spanned miles. He'd been here for 8 months now, and every day felt the same. Attend lectures where instructors carefully avoided calling on him. Eat meals alone while other students whispered. Stand on this balcony and watch everyone else succeed where he had failed. The worst part wasn't the isolation. It was the hope that kept dying. Every few weeks, a new specialist would arrive with a new theory. Ancient meditation techniques. Experimental breathing exercises. Herbal treatments made from plants that only grew on the Empire's most remote worlds. Rituals that required him to fast for days. Each time, Kale forced himself to believe it might work. And each time, the result was the same crushing disappointment. His father, Emperor Thane, hadn't visited once. Official messages arrived regularly through diplomatic channels, asking about his studies and cultural observations. But they both knew the truth. The Emperor was ashamed to have a defective heir. In dragon culture, strength was everything. Fire was everything. A prince who couldn't breathe flame was worse than useless. He was an embarrassment. Down in the maintenance wing, 3 floors below where Kale stood lost in thought, Tom Mitchell pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway and whistled an old country tune his grandfather used to sing. At 62 years old with a prosthetic leg from an accident in the colony wars, Tom had learned to find peace in simple work. Mopping floors, fixing broken equipment, keeping the academy running while the important folks focused on their important business. He'd been watching the Dragon Prince for about 3 weeks now. Every evening, same routine. The kid would stand on that balcony, watch his family show off, then trudge back inside looking like someone had died. Tom recognized that expression. He'd worn it himself after losing his leg, after his wife passed, after his daughter Jenny moved to the outer colonies and stopped calling. It was the look of someone who'd given up on themselves but didn't know how to stop going through the motions. Tom had lived on 17 different worlds during his working life. He'd served alongside aliens from 100 different species, learned that people were pretty much the same no matter how many legs or eyes they had. Everyone got lonely. Everyone felt like a failure sometimes. And everyone needed someone to just sit with them and acknowledge that life could be hard. He'd been thinking about approaching the prince for a while now, but timing mattered. You couldn't just walk up to royalty. But tonight, watching Kale's shoulders slump as he headed back inside, Tom made a decision. He wheeled his cart to the break room, poured 2 cups of coffee from his battered thermos, and headed toward the observation hall. He found Kale sitting on one of the stone benches, staring at nothing. The prince's scales had that dull, lifeless quality that Tom had learned meant dragons were feeling down. Don't suppose dragons drink this stuff? Tom asked, holding out one of the cups. Kale's head snapped up, surprised. Nobody approached him anymore. The few students who tried to befriend him in the first weeks had eventually drifted away, uncomfortable with his silence and failure. He stared at the human janitor with the gray beard and worn maintenance uniform, holding out a steaming cup like it was the most natural thing in the world. No, we don't, Kale said slowly. Our biology doesn't process it well. Fair enough. Mind if I sit anyway? Been on my feet all day, and this old leg ain't what it used to be. Tom didn't wait for permission, just settled onto the bench with a grateful sigh and took a sip from his cup. Beautiful evening. Your brothers put on quite a show out there. Cale's expression darkened.
Yes.
They're very talented. Tom nodded, looking out toward the balcony where the last traces of firelight were fading from the sky. Must be something, being able to fly like that. We humans, we gotta use ships and shuttles. Always thought it'd be nice to just spread wings and go. There was a long silence. Cale waited for the inevitable question, the sympathetic comment about his condition, the awkward attempt to make him feel better. But Tom just sat there, drinking his coffee and looking content. Finally, Cale couldn't help himself. You work here. You must know. Know what? That I'm defective. That I can't breathe fire. Tom took another sip. I'd heard something about that, yeah. Doesn't seem to stop you from showing up every day though. That takes guts. Cale let out a bitter laugh. What choice do I have? My father sent me here to keep me out of sight. Can't have the broken prince embarrassing the royal family. So you're still here, still trying. That's not nothing. Tom looked at him directly now. I knew a soldier once, kid named Roy. Best tactical mind in our unit. Could plan operations that'd make generals jealous. But he couldn't fire a gun to save his life. Shook too much. Other soldiers gave him endless grief about it. What happened to him? Ended up running the whole communications division. Turns out there's more than one way to fight a war. More than one way to be useful. Tom stood up with a grunt. Anyway, I'll let you get back to your evening. Just wanted to say hello. I'm usually down in maintenance wing if you ever want someone to talk to who won't treat you like you're made of glass. The nights became a routine neither of them planned but both looked forward to. Tom would finish his maintenance rounds around 10, grab his thermos, and head up to the observation hall where Cale would be waiting. Sometimes they'd sit on the benches inside. Other times they'd stand on the balcony, watching the moons rise over the Academy's training fields. Tom talked about Earth in a way that made it feel real, not like the sanitized reports Cale had read in diplomatic briefings. He described actual dirt under your fingernails from planting tomatoes in a backyard garden. The smell of rain on hot pavement during summer storms. Friday nights at a place called a bowling alley where you'd throw heavy balls at pins just for fun, and nobody cared if you were any good at it. We had these things called county fairs, Tom said one evening, his eyes distant with memory. They'd set up once a year with rides that spun you around till you got sick, and food that was absolutely terrible for you but tasted amazing. My daughter Jenny, she must have been about 8, she won a goldfish by tossing a ping-pong ball into a tiny bowl. Brought that fish home in a plastic bag like it was the greatest treasure in the universe. What happened to it? Cale asked. Lived for 6 years. We named him Charles, like he was royalty himself. Tom smiled. Jenny cried for a week when he finally passed. We buried him in the backyard with a full ceremony. Her mother played music on her phone, and Jenny said a few words about what a good fish he'd been. Looking back, it was probably ridiculous. But at the time, it felt important. Cale found himself fascinated by these small human rituals, these ordinary moments that seemed to matter more than grand ceremonies. In dragon culture, everything was formal, measured, designed to project strength. There was no room for crying over a fish or celebrating something as simple as a carnival prize. Tom also talked about the war, though those stories came slower, carefully chosen. He'd served in the territorial disputes near the Outer Rim, back before the current peace accords. Lost his leg when his transport took fire during an evacuation mission. But the injury wasn't what haunted him. We were pulling civilians off a mining colony that had gotten caught in the crossfire, Tom said quietly one night. Rebels had taken the northern sector. Our orders were to extract key personnel and fall back. But there were families down there, workers who'd been promised protection. My commanding officer said we didn't have time, that we'd done our job. Tom's jaw tightened. I argued. Bought us maybe 20 extra minutes with my big mouth. We got 73 more people out before the bombardment started. But my daughter Jenny, she was stationed on a different colony 2 systems over. When the rebels hit that location in retaliation for our rescue, our forces made the same calculation. Key personnel only. Jenny and her entire research team were left behind. The silence stretched between them. Cale didn't know what to say. In dragon culture, you'd offer formal condolences, speak about honor and sacrifice. But those words felt hollow here. I'm sorry, Cale finally said, and meant it. Tom nodded. War's full of impossible choices. But I learned something from losing her. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. And sometimes the thing you think is most important about yourself, your strength, your ability, your purpose, that's not actually what defines you. It's the choices you make when everything else is stripped away. Cale began opening up too, talking about things he'd never told anyone. The shame that followed him like a shadow. The way his father would look past him during royal gatherings, as if acknowledging his presence would validate the defect. How his younger brothers had stopped inviting him to training sessions because it was too awkward having him watch from the sidelines. Every morning I wake up thinking maybe today will be different, Cale admitted. Maybe I'll try again and somehow it'll work. But it never does, and I don't know if hoping makes it better or worse. They were sitting on the balcony, watching stars wheel slowly overhead. Tom was quiet for a long moment, just sipping his coffee and thinking. You ever try not forcing it? Tom asked finally. Cale turned to look at him. What do you mean? I'm just wondering if maybe you're trying too hard. Making it into this huge thing when maybe it's supposed to be simpler than that. Tom set down his cup. Back home, we had this kid named Roy in my unit. Couldn't shoot straight no matter how hard he tried. Kid was smart, dedicated, practiced more than anyone. But put a rifle in his hands and he'd miss targets the size of a barn door. What did he do? Well, his sergeant was about to wash him out of the program. But then our weapons instructor, this old guy named Pete, he noticed something. Roy would tense up the moment he aimed. His whole body would go rigid, like he was trying to will the bullet to hit through pure determination. Pete made him try something different. Told him to stop aiming, just point the weapon generally in the right direction and breathe normally. Don't think about it. Just let it happen. Did that work? Cale asked skeptically. Kid ended up being the best shot in the platoon. Turned out his body knew what to do. He was just getting in his own way, overthinking every tiny movement. Once he relaxed and trusted himself, everything clicked into place. Tom looked at Cale directly. I've watched you sometimes, when you think nobody's looking. Seen you standing out here, and I can see it in your posture. You're wound tight as a spring, trying to force something that maybe needs to just flow naturally. Cale shook his head. I've tried meditation. Breathing exercises. Every relaxation technique the physicians could think of. None of it worked. Maybe because those are still techniques. Still you trying to control it, just in a different way. Tom shrugged. I'm not saying I know anything about dragon biology. Hell, I barely passed basic xenophysiology in training. But I know something about pressure. About what it does to people when they need something so badly that the need itself becomes the problem. Cale wanted to dismiss it. Another theory from someone who didn't understand, who couldn't possibly grasp what it felt like to be broken at such a fundamental level. But something about Tom's words stuck with him. Maybe because they came without pressure, without expectation. Tom wasn't trying to fix him or offering false hope. He was just sharing an observation, take it or leave it. I don't know how to not try, Cale said quietly. This thing has defined my entire life. My whole identity is wrapped up in being the dragon prince who can't breathe fire. How do I just stop caring about that? You don't stop caring. You just stop letting it be the only thing you are. Tom stood up, stretching his back. Anyway, it's just a thought. You're gonna figure out your own path, whatever that looks like. Sometimes the answer is where you least expect it. Tom showed up the next evening with a strange look on his face, like he'd been chewing on an idea all day and finally decided to spit it out. He found Cale in their usual spot, and instead of settling in with his coffee, he stood there studying the prince with an intensity that made Cale uncomfortable. What? Cale finally asked. I've been watching you talk, Tom said. And I noticed something. When you speak certain words, especially the deeper ones, there's this flutter in your throat. Like something's vibrating in there, trying to respond. Cale touched his neck self-consciously. The physicians mentioned the membranes. They said everything's structured correctly, just not functioning. But they are functioning. Just not the way everyone expects. Tom pulled over a bench and sat down, leaning forward. Back on Earth, we humans make sound through resonance. Our vocal cords vibrate at different frequencies to create different pitches. We can even whistle by controlling airflow and creating vibrations with our lips and tongue. Whistling? Cale's tone was flat. You want me to whistle? I'm a dragon prince, not a... Just hear me out, Tom interrupted gently. Fire breathing isn't just about muscle force, right? It's about igniting gases that your body produces. An ignition requires a spark, a trigger. What if that trigger is supposed to be a specific frequency? A resonance that tells your fire glands to activate. Kale stared at him. In all the years of physicians and specialists and ancient texts, nobody had ever suggested anything like this. It sounded absurd. Fire breathing was about power, about raw strength channeled through biological systems that had evolved over millions of years. The idea that it could be triggered by something as simple as sound vibration seemed ridiculous. But then again, everything else had failed. How would whistling even help? Kale asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice. It teaches you to control your breath in a completely different way. Not forcing air out, but shaping it. Creating specific frequencies by adjusting tiny muscles you probably didn't know you had. Tom stood up. Look, I might be completely wrong. Probably am. But what have you got to lose? 5 minutes of looking silly in front of a janitor who's already seen you at your lowest. That actually got a small smile from Kale. Fair point. Tom pursed his lips and produced a clear, high whistle that echoed off the stone walls. See? Simple. Just shape your mouth like this, control your airflow, and, he demonstrated again. Kale tried to copy the mouth shape, feeling utterly ridiculous. He blew air through his lips and produced a sound like wind through a broken door. Tom tried not to laugh. Okay, that's a start. Try tightening your lips a bit more. Less air, more control. For the next 20 minutes, the observation hall was filled with the sounds of a dragon prince making increasingly frustrated attempts at whistling. He produced squeaks, hisses, and one sound that made them both wince. Other students walking past gave the hall strange looks but kept moving, probably assuming the dragon prince and the weird human janitor had finally lost their minds. This is humiliating, Kale said after a particularly pathetic attempt. The heir to 17 star systems, pursing his lips and making noises like a broken steam vent. Yeah, well, I'm a 62-year-old man with one leg teaching a creature who could probably eat me in one bite how to whistle, Tom replied. We're both looking pretty ridiculous right now. Difference is, I don't care what people think, and you care too much. That hit harder than Kale expected. He'd spent his entire life worried about appearance, about maintaining dignity despite his defect. The idea of just not caring felt foreign and somehow liberating. They kept at it. Tom would demonstrate, making adjustments to his technique and trying to explain what he was doing with his tongue and breath. Kale would attempt to copy, failing more often than not. But slowly, over multiple evenings, something started to change. You're thinking about it too much again, Tom said during their 5th session. It's not a conscious thing. You don't think about breathing normally, right? Your body just does it. Same principle here. Stop trying to force the whistle. Just let the air flow and shape it gently. Kale tried again, this time focusing less on producing sound and more on just feeling the air move through his mouth and throat. A thin, wavering whistle emerged. It was weak and inconsistent, but it was there. There you go. Tom grinned. That's it. Now just practice that. Don't try to make it perfect, just get comfortable with the feeling. Over the following weeks, whistling became part of Kale's evening routine. He'd practice while walking the corridors, while sitting in lectures, while standing on the balcony watching his brothers fly. The other dragons thought he'd developed some strange human habit, but nobody questioned it directly. The broken prince was allowed his oddities. Tom pushed him to try different frequencies, different tones. High whistles, low whistles, long sustained notes, short bursts. Kale's control improved dramatically. He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before, the subtle muscles in his throat that responded to different pitches, the way his breath could be shaped and directed rather than just expelled. Try going lower, Tom suggested one evening. Really drop your pitch. Feel how your throat changes. Kale produced a deep, resonant whistle that vibrated in his chest. And for just a moment, he felt something stir inside him. It was faint, like a spark trying to catch on damp kindling, but it was there. A warmth he'd never experienced before, deep in the chambers where his fire glands sat dormant. He stopped whistling abruptly, startled by the sensation. What's wrong? Tom asked. I felt something. Just for a second. When I hit that low note. Kale touched his chest, trying to recapture the feeling. It was warm. Like something woke up inside. Tom's expression grew serious. Do it again. Same note, but hold it longer. Kale took a breath and whistled the same deep frequency, sustaining it as long as his breath allowed. The warmth returned, stronger this time. His throat membranes vibrated in harmony with the sound, and he could feel his fire glands responding, pulsing with a rhythm they'd never had before. "Your throat's glowing," Tom said quietly. Kale touched his neck and felt heat under his scales. Not burning heat, but the kind of warmth that suggested something was finally, after 27 years of nothing, beginning to work. They practiced the low frequency over and over. Sometimes Kale could feel the response, sometimes nothing happened. But the connection was there now, undeniable. His body was trying to tell him something, and for the first time in his life, he was learning to listen. "I don't understand how this is possible," Kale said, frustrated after an attempt that produced warmth but no visible result. "Why would whistling trigger something that forcing air through my system couldn't?" "Because forcing is about power, and this is about harmony," Tom replied. "Your body's not a weapon you aim at a target. It's an instrument you learn to play. And every instrument has its own specific frequency that makes it resonate. We just had to find yours." Kale practiced until his throat was sore, until Tom finally ordered him to stop before he hurt himself. As the janitor packed up his thermos and prepared to head home, Kale stopped him. "Tom, if this actually works." "When it works," Tom corrected. "When it works," Kale conceded, "I won't forget this. What you've done for me." Tom just shrugged, smiling. "I taught you to whistle, kid. You're the one doing the hard part." The storm rolled in without warning, the way they sometimes did on Academy worlds where the weather control systems had gaps in coverage. Dark clouds churned overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged white lines that made the air taste like metal. Most students had retreated inside, but Kale stood on the balcony, watching the raw power of nature with something close to envy. Tom found him there, rain starting to patter against the stone. "You're gonna get soaked out here." "I don't mind," Kale said. Thunder rumbled, deep and resonant, and something about that sound pulled at him. It reminded him of the low whistle he'd been practicing, that frequency that made his throat warm and his fire glands pulse with possibility. Without really thinking about it, Kale started whistling. The same deep note he'd been working on for weeks, but this time he held it longer, letting it roll out into the storm. The sound seemed to harmonize with the thunder, vibrating at a frequency that made his bones hum. Tom leaned against the doorway, watching. He'd learned not to interrupt when Kale was in this kind of focus. The kid had been practicing obsessively for the past month, and Tom had seen real progress. The glow in his throat was getting brighter, the warmth more consistent. Something was building toward a breaking point. Lightning cracked across the sky, closer this time. The thunder that followed seemed to sync perfectly with Kale's whistle, and suddenly the prince felt it, that warmth in his chest exploding into genuine heat. His fire glands, dormant for his entire life, suddenly synchronized with the vibration in his throat. They pulsed together in perfect rhythm, like an engine that had finally found its proper fuel mixture. Kale's eyes widened. His scales began to glow, first faintly, then brighter. A light blue luminescence spread across his chest and up his neck, unlike anything Tom had ever seen. The air around the prince shimmered with heat. "Kale," Tom said carefully, "whatever's happening, just breathe. Don't force it. Let it flow." The whistle shifted, dropping even lower as Kale instinctively adjusted to what his body was telling him. The heat built and built, no longer a gentle warmth but an inferno waiting to be released. For the first time in his life, Kale understood what his brothers felt. That pressure, that power begging to be unleashed. He opened his mouth wider, still holding that resonant frequency, and then it happened. Blue flame erupted from his throat like a river of liquid light. Not the common red or orange fire that his brothers produced, but a brilliant azure that lit up the entire balcony with the intensity of a welding torch. The flame was so hot it turned the rain to steam before the drops could even reach it. It roared out in a sustained column that stretched 50 feet into the storm, burning brighter than the lightning itself. Kale held it for 5 seconds, then 10, feeling the power flow through him as naturally as breathing. When he finally stopped, cutting off the whistle, the flame vanished instantly. He stood there shaking, staring at his hands like he didn't recognize his own body. "Holy hell," Tom whispered. The Academy's alarm system started screaming. Apparently, the sensors had registered an energy signature they classified as a potential attack. Lights flooded the courtyards as security teams mobilized, and students poured out of dormitories trying to figure out what was happening. Kale looked at Tom, his expression somewhere between shock and pure joy. "Did you see, was that?" "That was blue fire," Tom said, moving closer. "I don't know much about dragon culture, but even I know blue fire is supposed to be impossible. Legendary. It appears once every 1,000 generations, according to the old texts," Kale said, his voice shaking. "It's considered a sign of divine favor. My family's historical records mention only 3 dragons in our entire lineage who could produce it. He looked down at his hands again, then back at the sky where his flame had burned. I did it. I actually did it. Tom, I can breathe fire. Security arrived, led by the Academy's defense coordinator, a stern Corvalian named Commander Nash. Prince Kale, we registered a massive thermal event at your location. What happened here? Before Kale could answer, more people arrived. Instructors, students, administrative staff. Within 20 minutes, the entire academy seemed to be gathered in the courtyards below, all staring up at the balcony where the broken prince stood next to a human janitor. Show them, Tom said quietly. You've earned this. Kale stepped to the edge of the balcony. He took a breath, found that deep frequency in his throat, and whistled. The blue flame came easier this time, as if his body was grateful to finally be doing what it was designed for. He painted an arc of azure fire across the sky, holding it until his breath ran out. The crowd below erupted. Some cheered, some stood in stunned silence, some fell to their knees in a traditional dragon gesture of reverence. Kale's brothers, who'd been watching from their dormitory windows, flew down in disbelief. But the real reaction came 3 hours later, when a royal transport ship dropped out of hyperspace and landed on the Academy's main pad with enough force to crack the reinforced concrete. Emperor Thane emerged, flanked by his royal guard, his face set in the grim expression of someone expecting the worst. Word had reached him about the thermal event. About his eldest son supposedly breathing fire. He'd assumed it was either a malfunction in the sensors or some kind of trick, another humiliation added to the long list. He'd come personally to handle the situation quietly, to prevent whatever disaster his defective heir had caused from becoming a public spectacle. Kale met his father in the Grand Hall, with Tom standing a respectful distance behind. The Emperor looked older than Kale remembered, more tired. The weight of ruling 17-star systems showed in every line of his face. Explain, Emperor Thane said, his voice carrying the tone of command that had intimidated councils and conquered worlds. The reports claim you produced fire. Blue fire. I want the truth. Kale didn't flinch. For the first time in his life, he stood before his father without shame. I did. And I can do it again. Show me. They moved to the balcony. The entire academy had gathered again, along with the Emperor's entourage. Kale could feel hundreds of eyes on him, including his father's skeptical gaze. The pressure should have been crushing, but Tom's words echoed in his mind. Don't force it. Just let it flow. Kale found his center, took a breath, and whistled that deep, resonant note that had changed everything. His scales glowed blue. His fire glands synchronized. And a column of azure flame erupted into the night sky, so bright and hot that people had to shield their eyes. He held it for 20 seconds this time, longer than before, feeling stronger and more confident with each moment. When he finally stopped, the silence was absolute. Emperor Thane stared at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. How is this possible? The physicians said. The physicians were looking for a physical problem, Kale said. They never considered that I needed to find the right frequency to trigger the ignition. That's what Tom figured out. Tom? Kale gestured to the human janitor, who suddenly found himself the focus of the Emperor's attention. Tom Mitchell, Your Majesty, is the one who taught me to whistle. He understood what no dragon physician could, that fire breathing isn't about force, it's about resonance. The Emperor looked at Tom with an expression that was hard to read. Gratitude, confusion, and perhaps a hint of embarrassment that a human janitor had solved a problem that had stumped the Empire's best medical minds. You have my thanks, Emperor Thane said finally. And you will be rewarded appropriately. But Tom just shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I just taught him to whistle, sir. Kale did all the hard work himself. The news didn't just spread, it exploded across every communication channel in Dragon space. Within 48 hours, every colony world, every outpost, every dragon family from the Empire's core to its furthest borders had heard the story. Prince Kale, the defective heir who'd been hidden away in shame, had breathed blue fire. And he'd learned how to do it from a human janitor using something called whistling. The Imperial Medical Council demanded an emergency session. They arrived at the Academy 3 days after the Emperor, a group of 12 of the most distinguished physicians in dragon history, and they were not happy. 4 decades, they'd examined Kale and hundreds of other dragons with similar conditions. They'd published papers, developed theories, built entire careers on the assumption that fire-breathing failure was a complex biological disorder. Now a human with basic knowledge and a thermos of coffee had solved it in 6 weeks. Dr. Vex, the council's most senior member, examined Kale thoroughly while Tom explained his resonance theory. The old physician's face grew darker with each passing minute. When Tom finished, Vex turned to the other council members. "The human is correct," he said, his voice tight. "We've been approaching this entirely wrong. Fire breathing isn't initiated by muscular force or chemical reactions alone. It requires a specific vibrational frequency to synchronize the fire glands. Without that frequency, the system remains dormant regardless of how healthy the anatomy appears." One of the younger physicians spoke up. "But that means hundreds of dragons we classified as defective could potentially." "Yes," Vex interrupted. "They could all learn to breathe fire if taught the proper technique. We missed it. 4 centuries, we missed something a human janitor discovered by simple observation." The implications rippled outward like shockwaves. Message boards lit up with stories from dragon families who'd hidden away sons and daughters deemed broken. Parents who'd spent fortunes on treatments that never worked. Young dragons who'd lived their entire lives believing they were fundamentally flawed. Now there was hope. Emperor Thane moved quickly, as rulers do when they sense a historic moment. He summoned Tom to a private meeting in the Academy's diplomatic wing. The janitor arrived still wearing his maintenance uniform, because he didn't own anything fancier and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. "Mr. Mitchell," the Emperor began, then paused, seeming uncomfortable with the formality. "Tom, you've done something remarkable. You've given my son his life back, and potentially helped thousands of others. Name your reward. Wealth, land, a title, whatever you want is yours." Tom thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "I want to build something. A place where humans and dragons can work together, study together, learn from each other's ways of thinking. Not a military academy or a political institution. Just a space where different species can solve problems by combining their perspectives." The Emperor blinked. "A research institute. More like a collaboration center. Dragons have thousands of years of knowledge and experience. Humans have this knack for looking at things sideways, finding solutions nobody expected. Imagine what we could accomplish together." Tom leaned forward, warming to the idea. Medical breakthroughs, engineering innovations, maybe even art and culture. We could call it the Cross-Species Innovation Initiative, or something less bureaucratic sounding. "You don't want wealth?" "Your Majesty, I'm 62 years old with a pension and no expensive habits. What am I gonna do with wealth? But a chance to prove that humans and dragons are better together than separate? That's worth something." 3 months later, the Bridgepoint Institute opened on a neutral world halfway between Earth territory and the Dragon Empire's core. Tom ran it with characteristic informality, turning what could have been a stuffy academic facility into something that felt more like a workshop where everyone was welcome to tinker and experiment. The first class of students included 20 dragons who'd been classified as unable to breathe fire. Tom taught them all to whistle. 16 of them produced flame within the first week. 2 more succeeded by the end of the month. The remaining 2 turned out to have genuine physiological issues, but even they showed improvement with the resonance techniques. Kale visited often, taking time from his new duties as Crown Prince to work alongside Tom. The Emperor had formally named him heir in a ceremony that drew representatives from across the galaxy. But more importantly, his father had apologized, privately, just the 2 of them, for the years of shame and isolation. "I failed you," Emperor Thane had said. "I was so focused on what you couldn't do that I never helped you find what you could do. That won't happen again." The dynamic between father and son was still healing, still awkward in places, but it was real now. Honest. And that mattered more than any grand gesture. At the Institute, Tom and Kale discovered other applications of the resonance principle. Young dragons learned to control their flame temperature and color by adjusting frequencies. Older dragons who'd lost precision in their fire breathing regained it through practice with harmonic techniques. Human researchers started exploring whether similar vibrational methods could enhance their own technologies. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. A dragon engineer named Voss, working with a human physicist named Rita, discovered that the resonance frequencies that triggered fire breathing could also be used to stabilize certain types of quantum reactions. Their collaborative paper revolutionized energy production across 6 star systems. "This is what I'm talking about," Tom told Kale during one of their evening conversations, now held in Tom's office rather than on abandoned balconies. Dragons never thought to question the traditional understanding of fire breathing because it worked for most people. Humans didn't understand dragon biology well enough to see what was missing. But put us together, and suddenly we're solving problems nobody knew could be solved. The cultural shift was slower but equally significant. Dragon families who'd once hidden their defective children now brought them to the institute with pride. Human medical students came to learn dragon anatomy, while dragon physicians studied human approaches to problem-solving. The rigid hierarchies that had defined dragon society for millennia began to soften as they realized that different perspectives had value. Kale's blue fire became a symbol of this new era. At formal ceremonies, he would demonstrate his ability, and people would see not just the legendary azure flame but the human friendship that had made it possible. Statues were erected showing the prince and the janitor together, though Tom insisted his statue be scaled down to normal size while Kale's remained appropriately grand. "I'm not a hero," Tom protested when they unveiled the first one. "I just taught whistling." "You taught us to look at ourselves differently," Kale replied. "That's worth more than any military victory." Years passed. Tom eventually retired from actively running the institute, though he still showed up most days to tinker in the workshops and chat with students. His hair went completely white, and he needed a cane in addition to his prosthetic leg, but his mind stayed sharp. Dragons across the Empire learned to whistle as part of their basic education. It became a cultural touchstone, a reminder that even the oldest civilizations could learn something new. Human-dragon collaboration expanded into dozens of fields. The barriers between species didn't disappear, there were still cultural misunderstandings and political tensions, but they became easier to cross. On the 10th anniversary of Kale's breakthrough, the Institute held a celebration. Thousands attended, including Emperor Thane, now partially retired and looking surprisingly relaxed. Tom gave a short speech, because he'd never been comfortable with long formal addresses. 10 years ago, I was just a janitor who noticed a lonely kid on a balcony, he said. I had no idea it would lead to all this. But here's what I've learned: the biggest breakthroughs don't come from the smartest people or the most powerful. They come from paying attention, from caring enough to help, and from being willing to try something that sounds ridiculous. Kale and I got lucky. But that luck only mattered because we were willing to spend time together, to listen to each other, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, the answer was simpler than everyone thought. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Humans aren't special because we're strong or advanced. We're just stubborn enough to keep trying new approaches when the old ones fail. And dragons aren't perfect just because they're ancient and powerful. But together? Together we're something neither of us could be alone. The crowd erupted in applause. Kale stood beside Tom, his scales shimmering with that distinctive blue glow, and thought about how differently his life had turned out from what he'd imagined during those lonely nights on the academy balcony. The janitor and the prince had become legends, but more than that, they'd become proof that sometimes the most important thing you can do is offer someone a cup of coffee and see where the conversation leads. Because you never know, that simple gesture might just change the entire galaxy. Retry. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.